Welcome to Heartbreak Chronicles. The crystal chandeliers in the hotel lobby cast a soft glow as Marcus Steele eased into the most luxurious hotel in the town he once knew. It's been 7 years, and everything's changed, and it seems like nothing's changed. His gaze swept across the marble floor, finally resting on the waitress next to the front desk, who was wiping down the table. The figure bending over to clean up the coffee stains made him pause in his tracks. Even in her plain uniform, even as the years had left their mark on her face, he recognized her instantly. "Jane, what's wrong with you?" Marcus said calmly. At the sound, Jane jerked her head up, dropping the rag in her hand to the floor. Her face instantly turned pale, her legs began to tremble, and her entire being felt as if her soul had been drained away. "Marcus!" Her voice was barely audible. "Why are you here?" Marcus adjusted the lapel of his customized suit, an icy smile curling his lips. "I came back to take care of some business." His tone was as relaxed as if he were talking about the weather. "I didn't expect to run into you here." Complex emotions flashed in Jane's eyes: shock, fear, remorse, and a hint of anticipation she didn't want to admit to herself. 7 years ago, when she uttered the words, "I wish he would disappear forever," into the phone, she never imagined that this wish would come true in this way. It was as if time had been rewound to that rainy night 7 years ago. Marcus remembers ending his business trip early that night to surprise Jane. As an actuary for a medium-sized insurance company, he has a really busy schedule that often requires him to travel to evaluate risk programs around the world. But he always remembered Jane's preferences, and this time he had bought her favorite Swiss chocolates specially at the airport, imagining in his mind her smile when she saw the gift. It's raining hard and Marcus' suit is getting a little wet, but he's in a good mood. The company has recently been interested in promoting him to department manager, meaning a higher salary and more consistent hours. He couldn't wait to tell Jane the good news. However, when he quietly pushed open the door to his home, the living room was dark. He set down his bags and heard voices coming from the bedroom. It's not Jane's voice alone. He stood in the hallway, the box of chocolates in his hand falling to the floor with a dull thud. Immediately afterward, he heard Jane's panicked footsteps and another man's cursing. "Damn, looks like someone's back," the male voice said. "No way, Marcus won't be back until tomorrow." There was tension in Jane's voice. Marcus pushed open the bedroom door and saw the last image he ever wanted to see in his life. Jane, wrapped in a sheet and pale, looked at him while Derek, her fitness instructor, was scrambling to get dressed. Derek is 28 years old, 5 years younger than Marcus, has a toned body and a charming smile, and is a popular trainer with the women at the gym. "Marcus, I can explain." Jane spoke up, her voice trembling. "It's not necessary." Marcus' voice was surprisingly calm, but his clenched fists revealed the anger within. Derek tries to slip away from Marcus, but he grabs him by the collar. "In my house, in my bed." Every word Marcus says seems to come out of his teeth. "Look, man, it's not what you think." Derek is still trying to weasel out of it, trying to push Marcus' hand away. Marcus let go of him and turned to look at Jane. "How long has it been?" Jane lowered her head, her messy blonde hair covering her face. 3 months. 3 months. Marcus repeated the number and suddenly laughed, a laugh that sent chills down Jane's spine. "We were married for 8 years, and you ruined it in 3 months. You're always away." Jane burst out, looking up, her blue eyes filled with tears. "Do you know how lonely I am? Every day to an empty house with no one to even talk to. Derek cares about me, he understands me, and he gives me what you can't." "So you climbed into his bed?" Marcus's voice remained calm, but the disappointment in his eyes was too much for Jane to look directly at. "The passion between us is long gone, Marcus." Jane tries to defend herself, her voice getting louder and louder. "All you do is work. All you do is make money. When have you ever really cared about my feelings? Do you remember the last time we had dinner together? Remember the last time we saw a movie?" Marcus looked at the strange woman in front of him, the wife he had once loved so much. "I work to give you a better life. Every penny, every night of overtime, is for our future. I thought you understood." "Understand?" Jane laughed hysterically. "It's not understanding I need. It's companionship. A real husband, not a money-making machine." Derek was dressed by this time and tried to leave quietly. "I think I should go," he whispered. "Stand still," Marcus said coldly. You haven't answered my question. How do you know my wife? Derek stopped and looked back at Jane. At the gym. She's my client. Clients. Marcus sneered. That's your gym's special? Marcus, come on. Jane pleaded. It wasn't Derek's fault. I initiated it. Just then, Jane's cell phone rang. She subconsciously picks up the phone, and it's her BFF, Sarah. Jane, are you okay? Is Derek gone? Sarah's voice came out of the phone, extra clear in the quiet room. Jane realized she had made a mistake and panicked, trying to hang up, but Sarah had continued. I told you a boring man like Marcus wasn't good enough for you. What else would he do but make that pitiful wage? How much do you make in a month? 8,000. 10,000. How nice for Derek. Young, handsome, and he knows how to be romantic. That necklace he gave you last time was beautiful. Marcus's face turned even paler. Turns out it's not just Jane. Even her circle of friends know about it and are laughing at him. Sarah, I'm not available right now. Jane said hastily. Oh, Marcus is back. Sarah's voice held a sneer. Let me guess, what cheap airport souvenir did he bring again? It's pathetic. You should have gotten rid of this liability a long time ago. Enough, Jane shouted into the phone. But Sarah continued. Don't worry, when you and Marcus get divorced and get half the property, you'll be good with Derek. It wasn't much, even with his little fortune, but it was better than what he had now. Seriously, I'm happy for you, finally getting rid of that boring man. I wish he would disappear forever, Jane said suddenly, a note of relief in her voice, so I don't have to deal with all this trouble. Sarah on the other end of the line laughed. Yeah, it's better if he just disappears and saves you from having to divide up your property in a divorce. But then again, what property could he have? That Honda you've had for 5 years? Or those boring insurance books? Marcus listened to the conversation in silence, the last bit of hope in his heart dashed. He looked at Jane, and the love in his eyes completely disappeared, replaced by a bone-chilling chill. You guys go ahead, Marcus said, his voice awfully calm. I'm disappearing. He turned and walked out of the bedroom, Jane calling his name behind him, but he didn't turn around. He could hear Jane's panicked footsteps, hear her chasing her out in her bedclothes, but his heart was dead. Marcus went into the den and began to gather his things. He pulled out the safe, which contained all his important documents: passport, birth certificate, degree certificates, professional qualifications, and some cash. He put them all in a backpack. Jane rushed into the study, her hair disheveled and tears streaming down her face. Marcus, please, let's talk. There's nothing to talk about. Marcus continued to pack. I thought you wanted me to disappear? I'll make you whole. I didn't mean that. Jane cried. I was just mad. Marcus stopped what he was doing and turned to look at her. Jane, you know what's ironic? I was going to tell you the good news today. The company is going to promote me to department manager, and my annual salary will go up to $150,000. I'm also going to use the bonus to take you on a vacation to Europe, to Paris, where you've always wanted to go. Jane froze, tears blurring her vision. But none of that matters now. Marcus continues. You chose Derek for that kind of passion and romance that you thought you had. Good luck. Marcus, I was wrong. I really was. Jane dropped to her knees and grabbed his pants leg. Give me a chance, please. Marcus gently pushed her hand away. Jane, something broken is broken. You betrayed not only our marriage, but my trust in you. It's unfixable. He picked up his backpack and walked around Jane, who was on her knees, to the door. Where are you going? Jane asked desperately. Didn't you want me to disappear? Marcus looked back at her one last time. As you wish. That night, Marcus disappeared into the rain in his boring Honda. He turned off his cell phone, removed all the cash, and headed east. He's going to a place where no one knows him and start over. Jane knelt on the floor and cried for a long time, and Derek had long since taken advantage of the chaos to slip away. When she finally calmed down, she realized Marcus was serious. She frantically called his number, but could never get through. The next day, Jane takes a leave of absence to go to Marcus's company, only to be told that Marcus has already submitted his resignation letter, saying that he has a family emergency to attend to. She went to the coffee shops, bookstores, and gyms Marcus frequented and couldn't find him anywhere. For the first few days, Jane held out hope that Marcus would return. She was sure he was just angry for a moment and would forgive her when he calmed down. Derek did move into the home quickly, reassuring Jane that Marcus just needed time. Don't worry, baby. Derek put his arm around Jane and said, "He'll be back. Men are like that. They need some time to lick their wounds." "You don't know Marcus." Jane leaned into his arms, but there was always an uneasy feeling inside. "He's a man of his word." "So what?" Derek was unimpressed. "Big deal, divorce. You get half the property and we can start over." However, when Jane goes to the bank and prepares to withdraw her money, she discovers a harsh reality. There are only a few $1,000s left in the joint account, just enough to pay this month's mortgage. Marcus takes the portion of the savings that belong to him, and Jane realizes that Marcus has been responsible for most of the family's expenses. She scrambled through the other bills: mortgage, car payment, insurance, utilities, things she never had to worry about before, all of which were now weighing on her alone. Her salary, as a part-time yoga instructor, was just over $2,000 a month, and she couldn't afford these expenses. "Don't worry," Derek said, though his tone wasn't as enthusiastic as it had been before. "You can ask for alimony when the divorce is finalized." However, when Jane seeks advice from an attorney, she gets even worse news. First, the house was purchased by Marcus before the marriage, and although the mortgage has been paid since the marriage, the title is in Marcus' name. Second, the car was also registered to Marcus. On top of that, Marcus is missing and she can't even get a divorce. Under state law, if a spouse is missing, you need to wait at least a year before filing for a unilateral divorce. The attorney told her, "And given that you are the party at fault, the court is unlikely to award you alimony." Jane felt the sky fall. She never thought things would turn out this way. In her imagination, the worst possible outcome would be to divorce Marcus and start a new life with Derek. But now, she was in a dilemma. Derek's attitude begins to change. Those sweet nothings dwindle when he realizes Jane isn't as rich as he thought she was. "I thought your husband was a rich man." One day Derek got drunk and showed his true colors. "An actuary, I thought I'd make at least $200,000 to $300,000 a year. It turned out to be a regular middle-class guy." "Is money that important to you?" Jane questioned. "Don't play innocent." Derek sneered. "Aren't you with me because you think he's boring? Regretting it now that you know he doesn't have much money?" Jane tried to retort, but she found herself speechless. Yes, she does find Marcus boring, finds him unromantic, and finds life with him too bland. But in retrospect, isn't that blandness a kind of happiness? As time passes, the reality of the situation is becoming more and more stressful. Jane's credit cards were soon maxed out, and she had to sell some of her jewelry to make ends meet. Instead of helping to share the load, Derek was acting like a parasite, draining her already meager resources. "I'm a fitness instructor with an unstable income." Derek always justifies himself by saying, "Just wait until I have more clients." But Jane gradually realized that most of Derek's so-called clients were married women like her. He specializes in attracting these lonely women with his sweet words and fit body, and then taking advantage of them. Finally, 6 months after Marcus disappeared, the bank issued an ultimatum. If the mortgage is not repaid, the house will be repossessed for auction. Jane looks at Derek in desperation for help. "Help?" Derek stood in the doorway, his gym bag in hand. "Why should I help you pay your mortgage? It's not like I own the house." "But you live here," Jane said angrily. "You've been freeloading for the last 6 months." "So what?" Derek shrugged. "Jane, wake up. I was never with you out of love. I thought you had money. I thought I could get something out of you. Now it looks like I'm looking the other way." "How could you?" Jane couldn't believe what she was hearing. "How am I doing?" Derek sneered. "Didn't you sleep with me for kicks too? Don't make yourself sound so noble. By the way, I've found a new target, a really rich woman. Good luck." With that, Derek left without looking back. Jane froze in place, looking at the empty room, finally realizing what she had lost. The house was quickly repossessed by the bank. Jane had to move to a rundown apartment that was filled with all kinds of noise and odors. She loses her job. The yoga studio owner won't hire a notorious cheating woman. In order to survive, Jane starts looking around for a job. But with no special skills, she could only do some service industry work. She first worked in a fast food restaurant, but was soon dismissed because she was too old and not quick enough to work with her hands. Then I went to work as a cashier at a supermarket, but it didn't last long. Eventually, she got a job as a cleaner at the best hotel in town. The pay was meager and the work hard, but at least it allowed her to maintain the basics. And all this while Marcus is thousands of miles away in New York, starting his new life. For the first month after leaving town, Marcus lived in a basement in Queens, New York. The room was small, with only a bed and a table, but it was enough for him. What he needs is not comfort, but a chance to start over. With an excellent resume and expertise, Marcus quickly landed a job at a tech startup. Although the position is a junior data analyst and the salary is not high, he sees the potential for growth in this industry. During the day, he works hard at the company and learns all kinds of new technologies. At night, he teaches himself programming and artificial intelligence online. His roommate, a programmer, often complained about the noise of his keyboard as he studied late into the night, but Marcus turned a deaf ear. Pain and anger became his greatest motivation. Whenever he was tired and wanted to give up, images of that rainy night, Jane and Derek in his bed, Sarah's taunting on the phone, and Jane's, "I wish he'd just disappear forever," would come to mind. One day, "I'm going to make all of you regret it," Marcus said to his haggard self in the mirror. The turnaround came 6 months later at a company hackathon. Marcus presents an innovative data analysis algorithm that predicts user behavioral patterns and greatly improves the accuracy of ad placement. His presentation shocked everyone, including the company's investors. "That's a fantastic idea," the investor said excitedly. "If it can be made into a product, the market value is immeasurable." The company decided to create a dedicated project team, led by Marcus. It was a major turning point in his career. Over the next few months, Marcus led a team that worked around the clock to develop a revolutionary ad delivery platform. The product was an instant success. Advertisers snapped it up like crazy, and the company's valuation doubled tenfold in just 1 year. As the centerpiece of the project, Marcus not only received a generous bonus, but also an equity stake in the company. But that's just the beginning. Marcus realized that the real opportunity lay in starting his own business. He used the money and connections he accumulated to start his own technology company, Steele Technologies. His first product was an AI-based personal finance app. This app analyzes the user's spending habits and provides personalized financial advice. Immediately after its launch, it took the entire North American market by storm. Success came so quickly that the media speculated about who this mysterious entrepreneur was. But Marcus always kept a low profile, rarely giving interviews and never talking about his past. As the company grows rapidly, Marcus doesn't forget about the plan for revenge. He hires his best private investigator to keep a close eye on Jane and everything that goes on in that town. Each report details Jane's current situation: losing her house, losing her job, being abandoned by Derek, and finally being reduced to working as a cleaner. She's living in a low-rent apartment on the east side of town. The detective's report reads, "Woke up at 6 a.m. every morning and walked 40 minutes to work at the hotel. With a monthly income of $1,800, there is very little left after rent and living expenses." Marcus looked at the picture of an emaciated Jane without a trace of pity in his heart. That was the price of betrayal, and she deserved to suffer it. But he knew that it wasn't enough. He wants more than Jane's poverty. He wants total destruction, to make her live in remorse forever. 5 years later, Steele Technologies went public and Marcus was worth over $1 billion. He became the new kid on the tech block, and his story has inspired countless entrepreneurs. But few realize that behind this success is a man's heart for revenge. Marcus begins to lay out his plan for revenge. He quietly acquired a stake in the hotel where Jane worked through a number of shell companies. When the holdings reached control, he decided to return to that town himself. "Boss, everything is set," his assistant Kevin reported. "The hotel management doesn't know who the real acquirer is yet." "Very good." Marcus stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of his New York office overlooking the city he had conquered. "It's time to go back. It's been 7 years, and it's time to clear the air." Marcus was unusually calm when his private jet landed at the town's airport. 7 years is enough time to change a man, to turn an ordinary actuary into a billionaire, to turn love into hate, weakness into cruelty. Kevin had arranged everything long ago. Marcus will appear as a mystery investor, and no one will immediately know his true identity. He's going to unfold his revenge slowly, step by step. Richardson, the hotel's general manager, warmly greeted the mysterious new owner. "Mr. Steele, We are honored that you have chosen to invest in our hotel. I hear it's the best hotel in town, Marcus said, sweeping his gaze across the lobby. Show me around. It was during the tour that Marcus saw Jane. She was on her knees, scrubbing hard at the stubborn stains on the marble floor. 7 years of labor had made her look 10 years older than she really was. Her once well-maintained hands were now rough and cracked, and her blonde hair had lost its luster. In that moment, Marcus felt a morbid satisfaction. But that wasn't enough. He wanted her to recognize him, to know who she owed her current situation to. Jane, what's wrong with you? Marcus said calmly. What happened next is as mentioned. Jane recognized him. Shock, fear, remorse. All the emotions were visible on her face. After a brief conversation, Marcus leaves coldly, leaving Jane to bear this harsh reality alone. Her ex-husband, the boring guy she and her friends laughed at, is now a billionaire beyond her reach. Marcus checked into the hotel's presidential suite and immediately called a management meeting. Starting today, the hotel will undergo a complete overhaul. He announced, the first thing is personnel adjustments. He flipped through the employee roster and his eyes rested on Jane's name. This Jane Winters, transferred to the laundry room. Helen, the personnel manager, was a little surprised. Ms. Winters is only a janitor, but she is a hard worker and never comes in late or leaves early. I said transfer to the laundry room. Marcus's tone was undeniable. If she doesn't want to, let her leave. Helen didn't dare say anything more, but did as she was told. The next morning, Jane was notified of the transfer. When she heard she was going to work in the laundry, her face turned even paler. The laundry room is the toughest department in a hotel, not only dealing with large quantities of dirty linens and towels, but also enduring high temperatures and humidity and the pungent smell of chemicals. Why me? Jane asked Helen. It's the new owner's decision. Helen said coldly. Ms. Winters, I'd advise you to take it. It's hard to find work these days, and you're not getting any younger. Jane bit the bullet and accepted the transfer. She knows it's Marcus' revenge, but she has no choice. This job is her only source of income. The laundry room, located on the second basement level of the hotel, had no windows and only a couple of ventilation fans blasting away. The room was filled with industrial washers and dryers. Steam filled the room, and the temperature was breathtaking. New. Brenda, the laundry supervisor, sized up Jane, a burly woman in her 50s with arms more muscular than many men. I hear you know the new boss. We used to know each other. Jane whispered. Then you'd better forget about this relationship. Brenda sneered. In my case, you're a common laborer. If you don't do a good job, get out, understand? Jane nodded. Very good. Brenda pointed to a pile of dirty sheets that had piled up. These need to be washed by noon. Remember, the sheets in the presidential suite have to be washed separately, with the best detergent and not a single blemish. Jane started her new job. Her arms were soon sore from having to carry dozens of kilograms of wet sheets from the washer to the dryer. The strong alkaline detergent corroded her skin, even with gloves on. Come on, Brenda growled behind her. What do you think this place is? A nursing home. Sweat soon soaked Jane's uniform. Her back began to ache sharply, but she didn't dare stop. Brenda was on her like an overseer, and the slightest slackness was met with a reprimand. The lunch hour is only 20 minutes. Jane was so tired she could barely hold her fork, so she took a few random bites and went back to work. The afternoon work was heavier, with towels, tablecloths, and uniforms piling up in addition to sheets. Have you washed the sheets in the presidential suite yet? Brenda asked suddenly. Jane's heart fluttered. She knows that's the room Marcus is staying in. It's drying. Bring it out, and I'll inspect it. Brenda ordered. Jane carefully removed the sheet. It was the highest grade of Egyptian cotton and was said to cost thousands of dollars for a set. Brenda scrutinized every corner and suddenly frowned. What is it? She pointed to a small, almost invisible stain. I don't know, it could be. Jane wanted to explain. Rewash. Brenda threw the sheet back at her. If there's another blemish, I'll dock you a day's pay. Jane had to start over. She knew that the stain was probably a deliberate attempt by Brenda to pick a fight, but she was powerless to fight it. At 8 o'clock in the evening, Jane finally finished her work for the day. She dragged her tired body out of the laundry room, aching, her hands red and swollen. Back at her apartment, she collapsed on the worn-out couch, unable to even take a shower. She looked at her red, swollen hands, and her tears flowed uncontrollably. At one time, these hands were carefully cared for by Marcus, who would apply hand cream and grab help when she did her chores. And now those hands are going to be soaked in pungent chemicals for over 10 hours. Marcus receives daily reports on Jane. He knew that her hands had begun to fester, that she often stayed up all night with back pain, and that her paychecks were being garnished by Brenda for various reasons. She's still holding out. Marcus asked Kevin. Yes, boss. Kevin replied. Brenda says she never complains and always gets the job done quietly. Marcus was thoughtful. He'd expected Jane to break down quickly and come begging for him, but her resilience exceeded his expectations. But it didn't matter. He had all the time and means in the world. In a month's time, the hotel is hosting a grand charity dinner, which will be attended by the governor and many socialites. Marcus decides to use this opportunity to humiliate Jane even more. Arrange for Jane to be on standby at the dinner. Marcus instructed, put her in charge of cleaning up any emergencies. Boss, would that be? Kevin wanted to say something. Well, what? Marcus looked at him coldly. It's nothing. I'll make the arrangements. Kevin is afraid to say more. On the day of the dinner, Jane was asked to stand by in the corner of the ballroom in her janitor's uniform. She watched the richly dressed guests talk and laugh, and her heart was cut to the core as she watched Marcus maneuver through the crowd. Good evening, everyone. Marcus stood on stage to address the crowd. It's an honor to be here with you all. As the new owner of this hotel, I hope to contribute more to this town. The stage erupted in applause. Jane hides in the corner, trying to be inconspicuous. Halfway through the dinner, the unexpected happened. A drunken guest accidentally spilled an entire bottle of red wine, splashing the crimson liquid all over the snow-white tablecloth and staining the dresses of several women next to him. Janitor, Brenda yelled. Jane, get over here. All eyes turned to Jane. It was all she could do to walk over and kneel in plain sight to clean up the wine stains. My God, if it isn't Jane Winters. A familiar voice rang out. Jane looked up and saw Sarah, her former BFF. Sarah is wearing a Chanel evening gown and holding onto a pot-bellied, middle-aged man who has obviously done well over the years. It's really you. Sarah feigned surprise, her voice loud enough to make everyone around her look over. My God, why are you working as a janitor here? Jane lowers her head and continues scrubbing the floor, hoping Sarah will leave. But Sarah clearly wasn't going to let this opportunity to humiliate her pass. Guys, this is my old friend Jane, Sarah said to those around her. You'll never guess that her ex-husband is our new owner, Mr. Steele. The revelation caused an immediate stir. People whispered and looked at Jane on her knees with strange eyes. No wonder she works here. Someone whispered. What a creation. Another exclaimed. Jane's face turned red and her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She tried to control it to keep the tears from falling, but the humiliation almost overwhelmed her. Enough. A cold voice rang out. Marcus walked over and watched the scene with an expressionless face. Mr. Steele. Sarah immediately switched to a fawning smile. We were just catching up. Jane used to be a really good yoga instructor then. Who would have thought? Ms. Davis. Marcus interrupts her. I recall your husband seeking investment. Sarah's husband rushed forward. Yes, Mr. Steele. Our real estate projects have a lot of potential. It's not necessary. Marcus said coldly. Steele Technologies has no interest in your project. Kevin, call security and ask Mr. and Mrs. Davis to leave. What? Sarah couldn't believe it. Mr. Steele, you can't just because. I can. Marcus's voice held no hint of emotion. This is my hotel, and I have the right to decide who gets to stay down. Security soon arrived and asked Mr. and Mrs. Sarah out in full view of the public. Sarah gave Jane a spiteful look as she left, as if it was all her fault. All disperse, Marcus said to the onlookers, then looked to Jane, who was still on her knees. Clean this place up. Jane continued her work in silence as the guests dispersed around her, but she knew that word of the night's events would soon spread throughout the town. She'll be the talk of everyone's tea time. The stupid woman who cheated on her billionaire husband and now has to scrub his floors. After the dinner is over, Jane is alone in the ballroom cleaning up the mess. She couldn't hold back the tears that finally fell, dripping onto the freshly mopped floor. Crying about what? Brenda said gruffly. The job isn't done yet. All these tablecloths have to be washed overnight for tomorrow morning. Jane wipes away her tears and silently clears the tablecloth. Each piece was stained with wine and food residue, and she knew it was going to be another sleepless night in the laundry room. At 3 a.m., Jane was still working in the laundry room. Her hands were numb, mechanically repeating the same motions. Suddenly, she heard someone walk in. It's Marcus. He was still wearing his dinner suit, just with his tie loosened a bit. He stood in the doorway, looking at her coldly. Remember? He spoke suddenly. 8 years ago, when I first met you, you said your dream was to open your own yoga studio. Jane's hand stopped, but she didn't look back. I vowed then to help you realize your dream. Marcus continued. I worked my ass off to save enough money for you to quit your job and focus on what you love. Marcus, Jane's voice choked. But you chose Derek. Marcus's voice turned icy. Chose the fitness trainer who was nothing but muscle. Tell me, Jane, did he give you the life you wanted? Jane turned around, tears streaming down her face. I was wrong, Marcus. I was really wrong. Wrong. Marcus sneered. You know what wrong means? What's wrong is that I trust you to cherish our marriage. The mistake was that I thought you loved me. He took a step closer, hate in his eyes. You ruined my life, Jane. But I have you to thank for the betrayal that made me who I am today. Please forgive me. Jane dropped to her knees. I'll do anything to make it right. Forgiveness. Marcus looked down at her. Jane, there are some things that cannot be forgiven. It's not forgiveness you want, it's relief. But I'm not going to relieve you. He turned to leave and paused in the doorway. By the way, starting tomorrow, your hours are extended to 14. Brenda will let you know the exact arrangements. Jane sat paralyzed on the floor, sobbing in despair. She knows Marcus is serious about making her suffer through the rest of her life. The next days were even harder. Jane has to work 14 hours a day with little to no breaks. Her body was rapidly collapsing, but she didn't dare take time off because Brenda had told her in no uncertain terms that one day off would result in 3 days' pay being docked. Marcus seemed to take pleasure in torturing her. He often purposely soiled the sheets in the presidential suite, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with red wine, making Jane spend more time cleaning them. He also demanded that everything he used had to be cleaned by Jane herself and not by anyone else. This is Mr. Steele's tie. Kevin would periodically deliver a bunch of stuff that had to be hand-washed and couldn't be damaged in any way. Those ties are top brands, worth thousands of dollars each. Jane washed it carefully, afraid of making any mistakes. She knew that Brenda would garnish her paycheck at the slightest imperfection. One day, while cleaning a shirt, Jane finds a picture in the pocket. It was their wedding picture, 2 people smiling so happily. The photo was a little faded and worn around the edges, and had obviously been taken out and looked at a lot. Jane froze. Why does Marcus still have their wedding picture? Doesn't he hate her with a passion? What's the holdup? Brenda's yell interrupted her thoughts. Get to work. Jane carefully set the picture aside and continued with the laundry. But a ripple went through her heart. Maybe there's still a little bit of her in Marcus' heart. However, she soon learned that she was overthinking it. The next day, she was fined a week's wages for going through the guests' belongings. This is your last warning, Brenda said viciously. Next time, just fire. Jane then realizes that the photo was put there on purpose by Marcus to humiliate her again. He wanted her to know how much he had loved her, and she had ruined it all with her own hands. As each day passes, Jane's situation gets worse and worse. Prolonged heavy labor and malnutrition have caused her health to deteriorate drastically. She was often dizzy and almost fainted in the laundry room a couple of times. The other employees looked at her with sympathy and contempt. Everyone knows her story, the foolish woman who lost everything in a moment of passion. She became the living antithesis. See, the young waitresses would remind each other, don't ever be like Jane. Marcus' revenge continues. He acquired more local businesses, including a yoga studio where Jane used to work. He converted it into a fancy fitness center and made a point of placing a sign in the most prominent place, "Betrayers Stop." The whole town was under his control. Jane can feel Marcus' presence wherever she goes. When she goes to the supermarket, the cashier looks at her differently. When she goes to the doctor mentions Mr. Steele's charitable foundation if there's any mention of it. And even when she rents an apartment, the landlord reminds her every now and then that the building has just been purchased by Mr. Steele's company. One rainy night, Jane dragged her tired body back to her apartment. She's been working 16 hours in the laundry room, and Brenda finds her overtime for a small mistake. She had lost all feeling in her hands, and her back hurt so much she couldn't straighten it. Pushing the door open, she was surprised to find the living room light on. Marcus was sitting on her beat-up couch with a glass of whiskey in his hand. "How did you get in here?" Jane asked warily. "I bought the building," Marcus said absently. "Technically, I'm the landlord." Jane leaned against the doorframe, so tired she could barely stand. "Sit down." Marcus pointed to the chair across the room. "You look like you're not going to last much longer." Jane shook her head. "What are you doing here?" "Come see my investment." Marcus surveyed the Spartan apartment. 7 years ago, you chose Derek over me. Now, do you think that choice was worth it? You've already won, Marcus. Jane's voice was weak. "You've ruined my life. What more do you want?" "Ruined your life?" Marcus stood up and walked over to her. "No, Jane. You're the one who ruined your life. I'm just letting you suffer the consequences." He pulled an envelope out of his pocket and tossed it on the table. "Here's a recent update on Derek. I thought you'd be interested." Jane shakily opened the envelope, which contained several photographs and a report. The photo shows Derek lying in a hospital bed with a withered face, obviously very ill. The report showed that he had developed cirrhosis of the liver due to chronic alcoholism and poor lifestyle habits. "He's dying," Marcus said coldly. "A man, penniless, no one cares. This is the man you betrayed me for." Jane's tears fell, not for Derek, but for his own stupidity. "He told me to tell you," Marcus continued. "He said he regretted ruining your life. He also said that he approached you from the beginning because he thought you had money." Every word pierced Jane's heart like a knife. Turns out she's not only a betrayer, but a deceived fool. Satisfied, Jane looked up with despair in her eyes. "You did it, Marcus. You made me realize how stupid and unworthy I was. Now you can go." Marcus looked at her, a flicker of mixed emotions in his eyes. But soon, indifference prevailed again. "No, it's not enough," he said. "Jane, this is just the beginning." He walked to the door and looked back at her. "Oh, right. Starting tomorrow, your rent goes up 50%. After all, the property values here have increased." The door slammed shut, and Jane collapsed to the floor. She knows Marcus won't let her go. He wants her to live and die. She, on the other hand, had to live with it because she had asked for it. The next day, when Jane braces herself to go to work, she finds a notice posted on the laundry room door. "Due to business restructuring, there will be layoffs in the laundry department. You've been laid off," Brenda said coldly. "Here's your paycheck, minus various fines, leaving $300. Jane looked at the money in her hand in disbelief. She's been working her ass off here for so long, and all she gets at the end of the day is $300? That's not fair. She finally exploded. "I work so hard." "Fair?" Brenda sneered. "Jane, the world has never been fair. Pack up and go." Jane knew it was Marcus' arrangement again. He wouldn't let her die easily, but he wouldn't make it easy for her either. Losing her job means she can't even pay her rent. Sure enough, the landlord came knocking on her door that afternoon and demanded that she pay the new rent immediately or else she would be evicted. Jane took out all her savings, plus the paycheck she just got, and it still wasn't enough. "Please, just give me a little more time," Jane pleaded. "No," the landlord said coldly. "Mr. Steele's company has rules about not being late on rent. Move out by noon tomorrow, or I'll call the cops." Jane is completely desperate. She's going to be on the streets. Just then, her cell phone rang. It's an unfamiliar number. "Ms. Jane Winters?" On the other end of the line was a soft female voice. "I'm from the charity. We provide temporary housing for people who are having a hard time making ends meet. Would you like to come and see?" Jane seemed to have grabbed the straw that broke the camel's back. "Really? Can I go?" "Sure. The address is..." Jane took down the address and rushed over early the next morning. It was a dilapidated building on the edge of town that looked to be in disrepair. A sign hangs on the door, "New Hope Shelter." Pushing open the door, Jane smelled a mixture of mildew and disinfectant. A few ragged vagrants sat in the lobby, surveying her with wary eyes. "Ms. Winters?" A middle-aged woman approached. "I'm Martha, the person in charge here. Come with me." Martha gave her a tour of the shelter. The so-called rooms are actually beds separated by curtains, with 8 people crammed into one room. The public bathrooms are filthy, and the food served in the cafeteria looks unpalatable. Conditions are sketchy, Martha said, but at least there's a shelter. Oh, and there's a rule that those who live here must participate in labor. What labor? Jane asked. Cleaning. Martha pointed outside. Sweeping the streets, cleaning the public restrooms, all the dirty work. The pay is small, but food and lodging are included. Jane gets it. It's Marcus' arrangement again. He wants her to be reduced from a hotel cleaner to a street cleaner, to live at the bottom of the heap and do the most menial of jobs. But she had no choice. I do, Jane said. With that, Jane moved into the shelter. She was assigned an 8-bedroom apartment with roommates who were women who were living in poverty. Some are drug addicts, some are alcoholics, some, like her, are just unlucky. That first night, Jane lay on her creaky iron bed, listening to her roommates snoring and dreaming, tears soaking her pillow. She thought back to that night 7 years ago. What would it be like now if she hadn't betrayed Marcus? Maybe they've got kids and live in a big house in the suburbs. Marcus would become a successful entrepreneur, and she would open her own yoga studio. In the evening, they would have dinner together and talk about the interesting events of the day. But the reality is that she's lying in a bed in a shelter, and tomorrow she's going to clean the streets. Marcus, meanwhile, is in his mansion plotting his next revenge. At 5 o'clock in the morning, the shrill bell rang. Jane climbs up with the others, picks up her cleaning tools, and starts the day. She was assigned to sweep Main Street, the busiest street in town. Pushing a garbage cart and grabbing a broom, she began to clean the sidewalks. People passing by looked at her with strange eyes. Some people recognized her and started whispering, "Isn't that Jane Winters? The same woman who betrayed Mr. Steele? Serves you right, retribution." Jane kept her head down and pretended not to hear. She mechanically swung the broom, cleaning up cigarette butts, confetti, and chewing gum. Her hands were beginning to crack again, but she didn't dare stop. The overseer is watching from a short distance away, and the slightest laziness will result in a deduction from his paycheck. At noon, she was cleaning out a trash can when a Rolls-Royce pulled up to the curb. The window comes down, revealing Marcus' face. "Did you have a good day at work?" he asked, his tone full of sarcasm. Jane ignored him and continued to clean out the trash can. "I asked you a question." Marcus's voice turned cold. "It was pleasant. Thanks for asking." Jane replied with an expressionless face. Marcus surveyed her dirty coveralls and haggard face with a glint of satisfaction in his eyes. "Know what?" he said. "I just got back from City Hall. They agreed to my proposal to beautify the city. So the workload of the cleaners is going to increase." Jane's heart sank. She was already exhausted and could barely hold it together if the workload increased. "Oh, and," Marcus continued, "wages are not going up. After all, you people should be grateful to have jobs." After that, the windows went up and the Rolls-Royce sailed away. Jane looked in the direction the car had disappeared in, and for the first time the thought of ending it all came to her. But she quickly dismissed the idea. No, she couldn't just cheapen Marcus. He wanted to see her suffer. She preferred to live. Even if it was to keep him from getting his way, she had to live. The next days were more difficult. The workload has really increased, with Jane working more than 12 hours a day. Her health was failing fast, and she coughed often, sometimes coughing up blood. Conditions in the shelters are also getting worse. Martha told the girls that due to funding cuts, meal standards are going to be lowered. The already unpalatable food became even worse, often moldy bread and canned goods that had been sitting around for who knows how long. Jane's roommates are leaving one by one. Some died of disease, some went mad, some simply disappeared. There are fewer and fewer new arrivals because there are rumors out there that this shelter is haunted. In fact, there is no such thing as ghosts. It is just the sound of desperate people crying in the night. One cold winter night, Jane had a high fever and was huddled under a thin blanket, shivering. She hadn't eaten in 3 days because the food was so bad she threw up when she ate it. In a haze, she thought she saw Marcus standing beside the bed, still in that expensive suit, still with those cold eyes. "Regret?" he asked. "Regret," Jane replied in a weak voice. "I regret knowing you." Marcus' face changed. He bent down and came close to her face. "What did you say?" "I said, I regret knowing you." Jane opened her eyes with an unusual clarity. "I wouldn't know what love is if I hadn't known you. If you don't know what love is, the loss won't hurt so much." You're in no position to talk about love. Marcus growled. Yes. Jane laughed weakly. Marcus, you think you've won? Look at yourself. You become a monster consumed by hate. You gained wealth, you gained power, but you lost your soul. Shut up. 7 years, and you're still living in the past. Jane continued. And me, I lost everything, but at least I admitted my mistake. I'm paying for my mistakes. But what about you? What price are you paying for your hatred? Marcus suddenly grabbed her by the neck. I told you to shut up. Jane didn't struggle, just looked at him quietly. There was no fear in her eyes, only compassion. Do it, she said. End it all. Let me be relieved, and let you be relieved. Marcus's hands were shaking. He looked at Jane's calm face and suddenly let go, stumbling back. No, he said, you can't get unstuck that easily. You will live and live in pain until… Until what? Jane asked. Until you're satisfied? Marcus, you'll never be satisfied. Because no matter how much you torture me, you can't change the past. Marcus gave her a hard stare and turned away. As he walked to the door, he turned back and said, starting tomorrow, the shelter is closed. All of you are moving out. Whatever. Jane closed her eyes. I'm tired, Marcus. Really tired. The next day, when the shelter was evicted, Jane had burned herself unconscious. Martha called an ambulance and took her to the hospital. Doctors said she was dangerously ill with severe pneumonia, coupled with chronic malnutrition and overwork. She doesn't have health insurance. The nurse said with difficulty, by rule, we can only provide basic treatment. Bill sent to Steele Technologies. A voice said. The nurse looks up and sees Marcus. He stood expressionless, with Kevin behind him. Mr. Steele, you mean? Give her the best treatment. Marcus said, I want her alive. The nurse dared not be slow and immediately arranged for the best room and doctor. Jane spent 3 days in a coma. When she woke up, she found herself lying in a luxurious single room, plugged into various instruments. You're awake. Kevin sat on the edge of the bed. The doctor said you were lucky. Any later, and you might have. Why? Jane's voice was weak. Why did he save me? Kevin was silent for a moment. I don't know. Maybe. Maybe what? Maybe he hasn't tortured you enough. Kevin said honestly. Jane laughed bitterly. Yeah, how could Marcus let her die so easily? He hadn't seen enough of her pain. During her recuperation days in the hospital, Jane received flowers and fruit every day. But she knew it wasn't out of concern. It was Marcus reminding her that her life was in his hands. A month later, Jane recovered and was discharged from the hospital. She expected to be sent back to the shelter or to the streets. But Kevin tells her that Marcus has arranged a new place for her to live. It was a small apartment, simple but clean. There's food in the fridge and a couple of new outfits in the closet. The boss said you can stay here until you find a new job. Kevin said, there's a basic monthly living wage. Why? Jane wondered. That's not like him. Kevin shrugged. I'm just the messenger. Oh, and this. He handed Jane an envelope. Inside was a job contract for a cashier position at a supermarket chain. Did he arrange this too? Jane asked. No, Kevin said. It was that supermarket that offered to provide it. They said they sympathize with what you're going through and are willing to give you a chance. Jane froze. For the first time in 7 years, someone was willing to give her a chance, and it wasn't because of Marcus' arrangement. She went to that supermarket for an interview. The manager was a kind, middle-aged woman who was friendly to her. I know your past, the manager said frankly, but I believe everyone deserves a second chance. As long as you do your job, the past is none of my business. Jane's eyes were moist. She nodded vigorously. Thank you. I will work hard. And with that, Jane began a new life. Supermarkets are hard work, but compared to what I've experienced before, it's heaven. Her coworkers were friendly, and no one looked at her differently. She works hard and is never late or early. Soon she became the most popular cashier in the store. Customers love her smile and patience. Marcus knows all about it, of course. His people keep him regularly informed of Jane's condition. When he hears that Jane is happy working at the supermarket, his face turns hard. What makes her happy? He growls at Kevin. She ruined my life, and now she gets to start over? Boss, maybe it's time to let go. Kevin suggested carefully. You've been torturing her for 7 years. What's 7 years? Marcus sneered. It's my life she's ruining. But Kevin could see that Marcus wasn't as determined as he appeared. Hatred had sustained him all these years, But when the object of his hatred was no longer in pain, he was instead lost. One night, Marcus drove by that supermarket. Through the glass window, he saw Jane working the register. She had lost a lot of weight and her face was wrinkled, but her smile was genuine. A mother with a child was checking out when the child accidentally knocked over merchandise on a shelf. Jane immediately went over to the crying child and gently comforted him and gave him a candy bar. Marcus watched the scene and a strange feeling flooded through him. Is this the same Jane who betrayed him? Or did she become a different person after all the suffering? He sat in the car for a long time until the supermarket closed. Watching Jane lock the door and leave, he suddenly realized that he didn't know her anymore. 7 years of torture had changed her and changed him. That night, Marcus had a dream. In the dream, he and Jane were still living in their little house. No betrayal, no hatred, just plain old happiness. He cried in his sleep. When I woke up, my pillow was wet. Marcus sat on his bed and asked himself for the first time, was it all worth it? He gets wealth, success, and completely destroys Jane's life. But why is he still unhappy? Why is the thrill of revenge so fleeting? Maybe Jane is right. He did win, but he also lost. He won revenge and lost himself. But how easy is it for him to let go of his hatred? For 7 years, hate had been a part of his life. Without hate, what's left of him? Marcus doesn't have an answer. He could only continue the game, even if he no longer knew what the purpose of the game was. And Jane, in her humble apartment, is getting ready for the next day. She doesn't know Marcus' kinks, and she doesn't care. She just wanted to live well, for no one else but herself. The wheel of fate is still spinning, and no one knows what the end will be. But one thing is certain. The price of betrayal has been paid, but the price of hate is just beginning to appear. That's the end of today's story. For more captivating tales, hit subscribe and never miss an episode.